Hello everyone and happy holidays. Welcome to Toxic Moonlight. My name is Jared, and to celebrate the season of giving money to the government, I thought it would be appropriate to do a deck tech on just that, modern Eldrazi taxes. Just keep in mind that I made this deck tech myself, so this deck will probably be different than the one you will build or play against. And remember, if you like watching deck techs like these, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe for more MTG videos. Now, let's begin. First things first, let's talk about what this deck does. What this deck wants to do is to control the board state with low cost of creatures and spells. These low cost of creatures can do this by creating taxation effects on your opponent to make whatever they do more expensive or more inconvenient. We also play a lot of hand disruption to get rid of your opponent's threats before they even get the chance to cast them. The main thing to keep in mind when playing this deck is to just make sure your opponent doesn't get to play the game. The first and most important taxation effect in the deck is our playset of Leonin Arbiter. Leonin Arbiter is a really powerful effect, especially in Modern, that says nobody can search their libraries unless they pay an extra 2 mana. In a format where fetch lands are in almost every deck, preventing a turn 2 or later fetch land can completely destroy any deck that relies on searching their decks for land. Another effect that prevents your opponent from playing is Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Thalia is the bane of many control and storm decks. Having their spells costing an additional 1 mana can mean the difference between winning or losing in many instances. We're also playing one copy of Thalia Heretic Cathar. This Thalia is 1 more power and toughness bigger and makes creatures as well as non-basic lands enter tapped, forcing more aggressives and fast decks to go slower. Next we have the Hand Disruption. Our 2 cards that do this is a playset of Tidehollow Sculler and Thought-Knot Seer. These 2 creatures essentially do the same thing when they enter, exile a card from your opponent's hand. The only differences are the mana costs, power and toughness, and their leave the battlefield triggers, where your opponent gets their card back with Tidehollow Sculler but only gets to draw a card with Thought-Knot Seer. There's a certain combo that we can perform with Tidehollow Sculler because of the way it's worded, but we'll talk about that later. One of the most important effects in this deck are all the enter the battlefield triggers, like Tidehollow Sculler and Thought-Knot Seer. We can abuse these effects by using one of the blink creatures we play. We have a playset of Eldrazi Displacers and Flicker Wisps. These 2 cards do the same thing. They have the ability to exile a creature and have it re-enter the battlefield. Eldrazi Displacer, however, is clearly the superior blink creature, being how you can just pay 3 mana to blink something, and Flicker Wisps brings it back at the end of the turn. These blink effects can also be used to protect one of your own creatures as well, like protecting your Thalia from a burn spell, which is really good. We also like to cheat creatures out into play, so we have a playset of Aether Vial to get out a large number of creatures out faster. And while we're at it, throw in a Blade Splicer to get some more value with its Enter the Battlefield effect over and over and over again. Now here's the combo that I was talking about. To perform this, you need a Tidehollow Sculler and either a Flicker Wisp with an Aether Vial or an Eldrazi Displacer. You can perform this with either of these cards, but Eldrazi Displacer is the better one, and the one I'm going to use for this example. To begin, play the Tidehollow Sculler to trigger its Enter the Battlefield ability and put it onto the stack. Then, in response to that ability, use the Eldrazi Displacer to exile the Tidehollow Sculler, putting the Leave the Battlefield trigger on the stack. Then, the Tidehollow Sculler re-enters, and its Enter the Battlefield trigger happens again. Now, let's resolve the stack. The first thing that happens is that the newest trigger resolves first. So you will look at your opponent's hand and exile a non-land card with the blinked Tidehollow Sculler. Then, the Leave the Battlefield trigger tries to resolve, but since that trigger is attributed to the old pre-blinked Tidehollow Sculler that didn't exile anything, the ability just goes away. Then, the last trigger resolves, so you look at your opponent's hand again and exile a non-land card. The end result is that you have taken 2 cards from your opponent's hand and put them into exile. One of they can get back once Tidehollow Sculler leaves, and one that cannot. Again, I recommend using Eldrazi Displacer for this because Flicker Wisp is too slow since it only comes back at the next end step. Hopefully this representation helped you understand this interaction. Let's look at the removal. The first of this is a Wasteland Strangler. Since we're putting a lot of cards into exile with Tidehollow Sculler and Thought-Knot Seer, We shouldn't have too much of a problem using them to give a creature -3/-3 when it enters. Wasteland Strangler also makes a great target for your Displacers and Flicker Wisps. We also have our favorite 1-mana exile effect, Path to Exile. All that is left in the main deck is the land. You may notice that we're not playing any fetch lands. Well, since we're playing Leonin Arbiter, it doesn't make too much sense to play them because we aren't going to be able to search our libraries too often. So we're going to ignore those. Instead, we play a Caves of Koilios, which offers us all 3 kinds of mana we need, white, black, and colorless. We also play Concealed Courtyard as an Orzhov fastland, and Eldrazi Temple since we play so many Eldrazi creatures. We have some Ghost Quarters to keep your opponent off of land, as well as some Shambling Vents as an alternative creature. We have one more non-basic land in the form of Godless Shrine, and then rounded out with 2 plains and a single swamp. So we have a very vast sideboard because this deck, like all decks, has its weaknesses. We have 3 copies of Rest in Peace for Reanimator decks, and 3 copies of Stony Silence for Affinity and Artifact Hate. We have 2 Mirian Crusader as a 2/2 with double strike with protection from black and green, a Gideon Ally of Zendikar as an extra beat stick, a Burrington Forge Tender to save yourself from a burn spell, 2 Fatal Push as some extra removal, a Kambal Council of Allocation to put the pressure on non-creature decks, a Orzhov Pontiff to buff your team while nerfing your opponent's team, and a Dismember as another flexible kill spell. Eldrazi Taxes is a deck that is fun to play, but absolute hell to play against. It will almost always be an uphill battle. If you're interested in this deck, feel free to use this deck list as an example when you decide to build this deck or learn to play against it. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends. If you want to see more MTG videos like this one, feel free to subscribe for more content. And as always, if you want to suggest a topic for next week's video, leave your ideas in the comments below. Until next time, see ya.